Would you pray with me? God, we thank you for bringing us once again to this season, to this time, to this place. Lord, I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditation of every heart would be pleasing to you, O Lord, our God, our rock, and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, I imagine some of you have had this experience. You'll sit down and start watching a movie with a younger person, say anyone under the age of 13, and inside the first 10 minutes, the main character will do or say something a little cryptic or a little puzzling, or a fraction of the movie's conflict will be revealed by a character's action, and then your younger viewing partner turns to you and says, "Why did they do that?" Once or twice, I've paused the movie and said something like, "That's the right question, for sure, but the movie is not going to reveal that to you right now." We need to be patient and trust that the movie, if it's any good, will answer those questions as we watch it. Now, in my middle-aged years as a grumpy, older millennial, I can't help but blame this lack of patience on the internet. For kids these days, any clip longer than 3 seconds that does not just say exactly what it is seems like a waste of time. But that's just lazy scapegoating. Or more likely, more precisely, it's my tandem illiteracy in both social media and internet culture. As my family can attest to, if you ever try to show me a meme or something on TikTok, you first have to give me 5 minutes of backstory so I can get a general sense and understanding of the joke. And can anyone relate to this? Okay. Because unlike a full-length film, which will disclose information about itself slowly and in various ways, a meme or a tweet or a TikTok presumes instant knowledge of everything that came before it. They're often layered with derivatives and inside jokes and webs of irony. And for all its immediacy, it is not isolated from its past. It exists and it is allegedly funny. Shots fired. Because it has a multi-layered past. It's as if all its layers of time and meaning are compressed. And this is why my family gets so frustrated with my internet illiteracy, because explaining linearly what should be understood immediately is pedantic. Not only that, taking the time to explain this medium is contrary to the immediacy of the medium. So in studying to preach on the 3 wilderness temptations of Jesus for the 3rd time in 4 years, I had this realization. You get it. I had this realization. Time and meaning are compressed in this familiar scene. In all their immediacy, the 3 temptations are not isolated from their past, but distinct from a meme or a TikTok video. These 3 temptations are also not isolated from their future. The 3 temptations of Jesus point backward and forward. Time and meaning are compressed. And when all the significance before this and after the scene are connected for the viewer, we get a sense of what is at stake, and we get an answer to the question, why did he do that? But here's the problem with the medium of preaching. I only have my voice. I can only say one word at a time, and I don't have the time or the budget to produce the film I have in my head. So instead, though I might fail in the process, I'm going to attempt to storyboard this scene for you. So, Res Cov, RC, Booby, Baby, here is my pitch for the 3 temptations. We open on a soaking wet Jesus walking toward the camera. In soft focus, we see that he is walking away from the Jordan River, and a haggard man named John is still standing in the river, looking up, dumbfounded as a beam of light is going back up into the sky. As Jesus arrives at the foot of the camera and wipes the water off of his forehead, on the screen in big white block letters pops, "This is my son." Jesus continues to walk toward the camera, and those words fade away. And as he walks closer, his face blurs out of focus, and we cut to black. And on the screen pops, "Into the wilderness." And in rapid successions, we see images of Adam and Eve cast from the garden into the wilderness, Abraham wandering away from his homeland into the wilderness, the Israelites grumbling in the wilderness, Elijah and John the Baptist each living alone in a cave in the wilderness. And then, slow fade in, we see the back of Jesus' head. He's looking out on a rugged landscape. The sun is setting. Ominous music swells. We hear a scratchy, indistinguishable voice chattering gibberish, and the only words we can make out are, "If you are, if you are." His back still to the camera, Jesus begins to walk away from the camera and deeper into the wilderness. Fade to black. Just as the music resolves, on the screen pops 40 days later. The number 40 remains, and days later fades out. And under the number 40, we see quick cuts, quick images of Noah in the ark for 40 days, Moses and the Israelites in the wilderness for 40 years, Elijah on his 40-day journey to Mount Sinai. 40 remains on the screen, and now a famished and haggard Jesus walks toward the camera. The number 40 fades out, and as he gets closer to the camera, we can see that his eyes are deep set. His lips are parched. He is breathing heavily, and he nearly trips on a rock about the size of a loaf of bread. We see him pick it up and cradle it in his hands. And again, that scratchy voice returns, "If you are, if you are, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread." We can hear Jesus' stomach rumble, and boom, we zoom into the stone in his hands, and we're transported back to the time of Moses. And all around Moses, we hear the hangry Israelites longing for bread, longing for their former slavery when they were fed but not free. Jump cut to the next morning, manna covers the ground, and God has fed them. We zoom away from Moses, back through the stone in Jesus' hand. He lifts it up with an ambiguous look in his eyes, and we flash forward in time. And the stone morphs into 2 loaves. And in front of Jesus stands a multitude of listeners, like 5,000 or so by low estimates, soon to be fed by these 2 loaves and these 5 fish. And Jesus lowers the loaves. And we flash forward again, and in place of the multitude sit 12 men. And he lowers his arms, he extends the bread toward them and says, "This is my body broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And we zoom away from this scene, back to the wilderness, back through the stone Jesus is raising above his head, and a puzzling look flashes across his face, and the audience wonders, what miracle will he choose to perform? Will he selfishly feed only himself now, or selflessly choose to feed others later? A smirk appears on his face, and he casually tosses the stone to the side. He says to the camera, quoting Moses in Deuteronomy, "One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Where Israel failed in the wilderness and let their hunger distract them from their identity and their mission as God's people, Jesus sees the past and the future as a whole. And because of this, he does not take a selfish, self-serving shortcut. Because this is not just about bread. This is about who Jesus is and what he came to do. So the camera is now at ground level. tight on the stone that Jesus just dropped, and a small whirlwind of sand kicks up and then quickly grows and swirls around Jesus, blinding him and also transporting him to the highest point of the temple. As Jesus lands and the whirlwind dies down, the scratchy voice chirps once again, if you are the Son of God, prove it and jump. It says in your beloved Psalms that God will keep you, his beloved, from all harm. The camera pans down at the toes of Jesus dangling just over the edge of the precipice, and we can see how far down it is to the bottom. The camera pans back up, and we see Jesus raise his arms. We zoom in on his face, right on a single bead of sweat, then boom. Flash forward, and that bead of sweat is now blood red. And as the camera pulls back, we see Jesus in Gethsemane, his arms outstretched in prayer. And we hear him mutter, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. We zoom back in on that blood red sweat, and then we zoom back out and we flash forward again, and that red bead of sweat is now a stream of blood from a crown of thorns. As we continue to zoom out, we see the arms of Jesus still outstretched, but hanging on a cross. And a bystander heckles, he saved others. Why can't he save himself? The camera lingers over the agonized face of Jesus, and then we slowly dissolve back into the face of Jesus atop the temple. He is teetering forward, his arms still raised, and the audience is anxious with anticipation. Will he jump and hope to avoid the pain of death? Will God save him? Is this even how God works? Camera zooms in on the lips of Jesus, and now he mutters a phrase from his future prayer in Gethsemane, yet not what I want, but what you want. And with that, he steadies himself, lowers his arms, and says to the wind, as Moses has written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Where so many have failed, where faulty theologies have managed the avoidance of pain, where faith in God has been turned from trust into transaction, Jesus sees the past and the future as a whole, and because of this, he avoids the false premise that he should avoid pain. Looking backwards and forwards, he can see that testing God and avoiding pain now is simply a shortcut around his journey to the cross. Jesus is still standing atop that temple precipice. He takes a small step away from the edge, and he's once again swept up in a whirlwind of sand and snow and stone. He is lifted up higher and higher, and the whirlwind of stones collect under his feet and consolidate under his feet. And when the whirlwind dies down, he is now standing atop a high mountain. He turns and gazes in each direction, and he can see all the kingdoms of his time. And the voice returns again, if you are seeking to create a kingdom, then you can have all this. All the nations will be gathered to you. All you have to do to gain political power is worship power itself. We see the eyes of Jesus widen as he continues to gaze out over these lands, these kingdoms, and his face is centered on the screen, but then sort of Brady Bunch style, we see the faces of these kings of old appear around him, and Jesus looks at each one. Pharaoh, who built his kingdom on slave labor. Saul, whose paranoia drove him mad. Jeroboam, who started the northern kingdom down a really bad track. Ahaz, who made an ill-advised political alliance with Assyria. Nebuchadnezzar, who laid siege to Jerusalem and exiled the people of Judah. And Caesar Augustus, who claimed for himself the title Son of God. Each man convinced of his greatness. Jesus gently closes his eyes. And much like their kingdoms have faded away, these men's faces slowly fade away from the sides of the screen. And as Jesus opens his eyes, we are transported forward in time, past even our own time, into a future not yet fully realized. And Jesus is seated on a throne with angels all around, all nations gathered. And as he begins to speak to those on his right, he says, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Whatever you did for the least of these family members of mine, you did it for me. The vision slowly dissolves as Jesus opens his eyes once more, and the audience wonders, will he cut corners to achieve political power? Or will he humble himself in solidarity with the powerless? What kind of kingdom will he choose? The camera is locked in on the eyes of Jesus, and slowly his eyes become watery. We see the sides of his eyes wrinkle with a gentle smile, and his watery eyes overflow into tears, whether tears of sorrow or joy, we cannot tell. And gathering himself, he boldly says, "No, get that cult of power away from me. As Moses said, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Where power has seduced and corrupted so many, where visions of equity and justice have been compromised for expedience' sake, Jesus sees the past and the future as a whole. And because of this, he will not humble himself to any power other than God's will. In order to complete his mission and usher in the kingdom of God, he must humble himself as only God can. Looking backwards and forwards, he can see that seeking personal glory is just a shortcut that will short-circuit his mission for the good of all and the glory of God. The camera slowly pulls back from the cheerful face of Jesus. And as the background comes into focus once more behind him, we can see that he is back at the edge of the wilderness. The camera continues to dolly back, and then Jesus begins to walk toward the camera, and both the camera and Jesus proceed up the trail out of the wilderness. Music begins to swell, and right as the beat drops, on the screen once more, in big block letters appears, "This is my son." And if we have done our job, RC, Booby, baby, the audience will understand and gain an answer to that question, why did he do that? The answer is simple. He did it. He resisted temptation because he trusted his God-given identity and his mission. He did it because he is the Son of God. But unlike so many scenes from the life of Jesus, this one defies our desire to lazily apply it to our life. So beware the preacher who tells you to apply these same principles and resist temptation like Jesus, because the plain fact is we don't have the miraculous option that Jesus has. We can't turn stones to bread or levitate to avoid pain or consolidate power with a word. The story, this pitch, is only secondarily about us. This story, the story of Lent, our approach toward Easter is about God's ability to compress and understand all time and all meaning. It is about God's ability to see the past, the present, and the future as a whole, and then remain faithful to and deliver the most satisfying and regenerating end. Thanks be to God.